If somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I need this built and I already have the whole code base built out for it, I can just sell it at a fixed price. I can just copy paste it. Here you go. But that's never the case. It's never been the case. Even when we're working with the same technology, we always are doing some level of engineering.
My first question is very simple. Are web applications worth it?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? And it depends on your situation. Obviously, they're not worth it for everybody. If you can run your business or get done what you need to get done with off-the-shelf software that's $30 a month, then naturally that's going to be, a lot better for you than maybe putting tens of thousands of dollars into a custom app. However, for many use cases, especially when businesses are trying to scale their operations and they hit a wall with those off-the-shelf solutions, where now it's costing more money to actually try to run your organization with those off-the-shelf tools than it would be to actually build a custom web app, then it starts to really become worth it, because in order for a business to scale, you need really solid operations and you need software that works for you. So yeah, absolutely, it can be worth it.
Yeah, or maybe you're trying to build some software that other people use as the off-the-shelf software. You find a process that works really good for your organization, and you want to build custom software around that and perhaps sell that to other businesses.
So, how should people think about ROI when it comes to web applications?
Well, there's a couple different ways to think about it. Number one, you have to say, okay, in order to calculate the ROI, how much of a budget do we have and how much do we have to put into the app? Because it's an investment, basically. What you have to think about is, okay, what is the goal or what is the outcome that this app is going to deliver for us? For some businesses, that outcome looks like automating a manual process that currently you're paying however many people, maybe 10 people to do. So the ROI there is you just automated 10 people. I mean, there was a story recently about a company who replaced 700 employees with an AI application, which that's custom software development. That's 700 employees, and the customer satisfaction was higher than before. They actually prefer the AI. So when you're talking about ROI, a lot of it is going to be automation. It's going to be automating things that people would normally have to do. So people are very expensive, and businesses always try to automate when possible, especially because you often get fewer errors as well. So you get better outcomes, and over time, it's actually cheaper. Those are a couple of ways. What do you think, Kelson?
I think you could also measure it based on customer satisfaction. Like you said, that with that AI deployment, more of the customers were satisfied. And so each business will have to kind of evaluate the ROI of what they consider satisfied client themselves. But that's just another way. How, are more clients satisfied? Is the process more efficient? Is it faster? Can we get our product to people sooner? These are all things that have to consider. Really, I think the answer to the question is is the software meeting your goals at the end of the day? Is the vision becoming realized through the software that's being developed for you? And if so, then it's probably worth the initial investment, because otherwise you wouldn't have had that vision in the first place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like businesses, if you're a business owner or you're someone who's building a business, you know that basically your business system, your step-by-step process that you have built to from point A to point B, whether that is designing like a website for someone or whether that's a production line where you're manufacturing something, like that system, what is the ROI of that system? Well, that's your entire business, right? That's how you make money. That's the better that system works and the more efficiently it works and the more, higher quality the output for the customers, the more ROI you're going to get. And really you should think about custom software as an integral part of that system, because that's basically what it is. It's automation for your business. It's streamlining. It's something that you can basically run your business on top of.
Yeah. So I guess there's two main categories that we put our return on investment into. There's the efficiency gains, and then there's just the results, the quality of your service or your product that you're delivering to your customers. Can you guys share any examples of projects you've completed where you've been really confident that there was an ROI for your client?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. We did a project where they had 7 people that would manually go on the internet and scrape the data for marketing efforts. They'd essentially look through all these different web pages and look for very specific records. And we built some software in the matter in less than a month that completely automated all of those jobs. And not only that, but the accuracy of the data that their entire marketing efforts depend on was superior to that of the manual process. And they only had to pay for it once, whereas every year they would have to pay for people to go through, and because that data changes over time, they'd have to, manually hire those people again, have them come in, pay them, $15, $20 an hour. And so, yeah, that's been a massive success for their project.
Yeah, I have a similar story actually. We have a client who they brought us in to fix their web application because the previous developers, they had basically done a really bad job in building it. There was all sorts of problems. There was a connection with QuickBooks that wasn't working well, and that was critical to their business. They needed it to work. So we came in, we understood exactly, how their business worked. It took a few meetings, but we mapped it out, and then we started fixing one area at a time. We started with the highest priority areas that had to do with their invoicing and their QuickBooks, which was obviously that financial stuff is very important. So we fixed that. We started fixing some other things, and then we started adding features after everything was fixed. And a couple months later, my contact at the company told me that we had basically fully automated 3 full-time positions. And that was bringing them tremendous ROI because those people were now able to move to other parts of the company where they could be more productive, because a lot of the, very monotonous and tedious labor that they had been doing before was now automated completely just through a web app that actually worked. And so that's another example. Basically, these apps can fulfill parts of your business, especially now in the age of AI. They can do so much for you in terms of your day-to-day operations that there's endless opportunities to really streamline your operations and really scale with it.
Yeah, that sounds like kind of the ideal outcome, is to be able to basically do more things with the same amount of resources that you're already using. A lot of people shy away from automation because they don't want people to lose their jobs. But the ideal scenario is that you're just accomplishing more. It's enabling you to scale and tackle more problems than you were able to get through before.
If you think about on that point, like there are so many things that really smart people need to do in the business, but there are also so many things that are just tedious, repetitive tasks. So really, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's very easy to go into, if I go into a business and I start looking around at their operations, they tell me about their problems and where they're struggling, I can find areas where software could completely automate entire swaths of those really tedious jobs. And you can use those high quality employees to do other jobs that are higher level, basically.
Yeah, or if you have low skilled labor in your operation, you could get rid of those employees as well, which is what we're seeing in a lot of the supermarkets where you have all the self checkouts instead of actual cashiers, right? And it's because these businesses know that investing in the custom software, which in this case is the self checkout kiosks, is a better financial move for their business.
Yeah, stretch their dollar, basically, do more with less. Awesome. So let's start talking about the cost. What sort of factors affect the cost of a custom web application?
Biggest factor I'd say is probably the scope of the application. Are we building something really small? Are we building an integration where one system talks to another system? Or are we building something that the entire company is going to run off of, where it's going to handle their billing, it's going to handle their payroll, it's going to handle every aspect of their business? The scope really will drive the price. And that's why what we try really hard to do is cut that scope down as much as we can to where we're finding areas in the business that will benefit the most from custom software. And if we're able to find what scope is most valuable in the business and build off of that. It'll reduce the overall cost of the project, and it'll also make sure that we're delivering the most value to the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that can influence the cost is the platform or the technology that you're going to use. So there are low code platforms that we do work with, like Knack, for example. And sometimes if you're going to build an app on these, you can get something up and running. You could prototype really quickly. Those can reduce the cost. However, there are more limitations. It's a little slower. It's a little more clunky because it's an off the shelf, like low code builder. If it's a fully custom web app, then that's going to be a little more expensive because basically we're building something from the ground up. Basically, it's something you're going to own. So you have full ownership over it. It's an actual piece of technology that you're building for your business. And so that can be more expensive up front, but of course it's going to work better. It's going to be faster. It's going to be more reliable, more customizable. So really, what does your business need? And a lot of businesses, when they see how it feels to use one of these custom apps, there's no question that it's worth it for them. They know it's worth it because if your business is gonna use something every hour of every day, all those saved minutes, they add up. That's what technology you choose to use could be a big factor.
Yeah, especially if the technology that you need doesn't exist, it needs to be built. Then you need very specialized talent if you're creating something from nothing. A lot of times we're able to use pre-existing technologies to build custom applications. We're able to use frameworks that are very well supported by very large companies like React, which is supported by Facebook. But there's other times where we have to create things out of nothing. And the expertise that's needed ends up requiring higher level talent, which ends up costing more money.
On that same topic of what impacts the cost, timeline, how fast do you need to build? Because if you need something built really fast, then there is somewhat of a trade-off between speed and efficiency. If you introduce a few more developers into the mix, right, to speed things up, oftentimes there's some diminishing returns because when you're building an app, people are working in each other's code. They're both trying to make changes to the same file at the same time. There can be some overlap there and a little bit of loss of efficiency, but at the same time, that's double the amount of developers working on your app, so it's going to go faster. So, if you're thinking about building a web app and you think that you might be able to give yourself more time by starting earlier, you could save money that way because you're going to be able to not be so stressed out about pushing this timeline that is really short.
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't consider is they also have a big impact on how much their web application costs. Because if they come to us and they're all wishy-washy about what they need, or they don't really understand their business problems themselves, then it ends up where we build some software for them, and then next month we're carrying it out of the application. And I've seen that time and time again, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it because we don't know what their business needs. We don't know what direction their business needs to go, and that's the job of the CEO, right? If he says, "Hey, we're working with this partner now, let's integrate with them," and then the next month he changes his mind, that's a lot of money wasted in development. So taking time to really understand what the top priorities are and strategizing and thinking what is most likely to have the highest impact instead of just treating an application like something you throw mud at the wall and you see what sticks, or you're just experimenting. We find that clients that really have a great vision save a lot of money.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
makes sense. So it's obviously always going to vary quite a bit as far as how much a web app is going to cost someone in the long run. How accurate can you get? How much of an expectation are you able to set with your clients about the cost?
Well, think of it this way. So let me tell you what the process is for figuring out how long something's going to take to build. And maybe that'll give you a better idea of why it's so hard to estimate. So the client comes to us and they say, "Hey, we need to be able to print labels. We have a box that comes in, it has a barcode on it, we scan it, and then we need our system to be able to print out a label that's 2 inches by 2 inches with the SKU and all the information for the product, and we need to be able to put it on the box," right? Some kind of feature like that. So then what I do is I say, okay, I understand that. I ask them some questions like how many different types of barcodes are there? Are there going to be different sizes, different printers? You know, do the printers need to be accessible by anyone who's logged in or just the computer where the printer's at? Like all these questions that come up, right? So then once I sort of understand what the issue is, I'll go to the developer and I'll tell them about what we are trying to do. In order to do this, we need to use a framework or a piece of technology for printing or for printer networking or something like that, right? So at this point, we're going to need to spend some time. I'm going to need to spend some time first to write out exactly what is needed, write the requirements out, write the user stories out. That's some time that's needed. Then the developer's going to need some time to understand that, to get on a call with me to go through it, and then to go investigate what type of technologies are out there that can achieve that goal. That's some more time that's needed. Now, a lot of times when you're trying to investigate technologies that you might be able to use for something like this, you don't really know in advance exactly what the process is going to look like for taking that technology and doing this new thing with it, right? It's like, the technology can do it. Most likely, it looks like the right technology to use. However, until you actually start using it, until you actually get into the code and start trying to connect things together, you don't know how difficult it's going to be, how many problems you might run into if there's little nuances or little roadblocks that you might run into during the development. So you don't know these things, but by the time you spend enough time to figure that out, you might as well just build it, right? Because you don't know what you're going to run into throughout the whole process. Even if it's almost done, you could run into something that slows you down. So what do you do then to give an estimate? Well, what you do is once you figure out how you're going to build it and you think you have a solution, you can use your past experience and maybe you say, okay, based on my experience, I mean, last month we built like a camera app and that was similar to this. It's not the same, but that took 30 hours. So I think this time building these label printers is going to take, let's say, 20 to 40 hours. And so that's your estimate. However, there's no way to know if that's really how long it's going to take because in order to really know that, you'd have to be an expert at this new technology that you're going to use and you've never used it before. So does that give you a good idea? I mean, basically, that's why it's so hard to estimate because really it's engineering, right? So that means we're building something that's never been built before. We're using a bunch of different technologies that are out there. We're pulling them together and we're creatively building something new, which is an exploratory process. So it's very difficult to estimate. And that's just one small example. Now, if you expand that out to an entire web application and also keep in mind that the client's desires and their different feature requests are going to change throughout the entire process. Every time they use the app and they think of a new feature, that changes the trajectory of that app. So it's very difficult to ever know in advance how long a web app is going to take to build.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you would have asked Elon Musk, how much money is it going to cost for him to launch one of his rockets and have it come back down and land? There's no way he would have been able to give you the answer until after he already did it because it didn't exist. All the technologies exist to do it, but the actual rocket that he launched, he had to go through how many iterations, how many explosions until he finally got it to come back down onto the landing pad.
Yeah, like I know a lot of people would say, well, hey, if you're an experienced software engineer, how come you wouldn't know how to do this and you wouldn't know exactly how long it's going to take? But there's going to be some portion of that project that, maybe you've done something like that before, but you never integrated it with this specific system. And it didn't have to then, perform this function that does a very specific thing for that client. So that's why they're engineers, right? That's the engineering part is the problem solving, the investigation, and applying that knowledge to then solve a new novel problem that you run into.
That's right. If somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I need this built and I already have the whole code base built out for it, I can just sell it at a fixed price. I can just copy paste it. Here you go. But that's never the case. It's never been the case. Even when we're working with the same technologies, we always are doing some level of engineering.
Yeah, makes sense. So all that said, let's go ahead and just ignore that for a second. And let me ask you guys to give, your best estimate of, let's say, a basic project, a mid-level project, and a complex web application project. where does the pricing usually fall when all is said and done?
I kind of break it into buckets. If I'll try to do this the best I can, and these are just kind of averages. A small, let's just talk about low code first. A small low code, which would be like, I have an ice cream shop. I want to log visits to that ice cream shop. Somebody comes in, I'm going to ask them their information. I'm going to put it in. It's just going to be a database of all my clients and their visits. So I need all clients. So I have all the clients' names and then several visits per client. That's a small application. And I would say that's going to cost $5,000 to $10,000. Then say they want to have all of the inventory for their ice cream. They want to have the different types of sprinkles. The more of these different data points that we're saving, the more expensive it's going to be, because that means the more forms, and we're still talking about low code, then it's 10 to 20 and then 30 to maybe 100 for a large application. Just the more you add, the more general need there is for automation and custom code inside of these low code platforms.
Well, when you're saying a basic application, this brings up a good point, because what is considered basic is very different depending on your perspective, right? Because it may be very basic in how it's going to be used. It may appear very basic to the person using it. It may be just one single page with one form, right?
Yeah, it's ChatGPT basic. It's only one
Right.
page. It's just you just type into a little box,
Right, exactly. But then, you're typing in a little message, and the message box is basic, but what it's doing in the background is not basic, right? So there is, not to say that there's not a difference. Like, there are smaller projects and there are larger projects for sure. It's just that usually when a client comes to us and they already think they know that a project is small, a lot of the times it seems like it's small, but it's not small, right? So that's one of the benefits of having someone who's worked on a lot of those projects and being able to talk to them and, just get an idea of how difficult the project's going to be. Because if someone comes to me and tells me about their project, I can pretty quickly put it into one of these categories, right? Small, medium, or large. It's just that the reason I can do that is because I've built a lot of these apps, right? So let's just say we have a basic app, something like a landing page of some sort that maybe you can schedule some emails to go out every once in a while, and you have a very basic CRUD operation that's like create, read, update, delete. That app could be spun up. Now, if it's a fully custom React app, there's still infrastructure that has to go into place. There's still Amazon Web Services. There's still databases. So even a very, very basic app, a lot of the times you are looking at around, 50, 60 hours or somewhere around that. Maybe could be a little more, could be a little less. But that's a good, like, probably 50 hours is a good estimate for a small custom app. If it's a small low code app where we're using someone else's infrastructure, we're using someone else's databases, and all we have to do is configure it, then, 10 to 20 hours. You're looking at like 10 to 20 hours instead of, 50 to 80. So that gives you maybe a good idea. Also, for the low code, some examples of low code platforms. What do we have? We have Knack, QuickBase,
Bubble,
Zoho. Just so you guys know what low code apps are out there, as an example.
Yeah, that's right. And then for custom, the same app, right? You're going to log the visits. That's probably going to start at $15,000 to $30,000, and then the medium sized 30 to 100, and then the large 100 to 200, and then like the enterprise level application above that would be my kind of just throwing estimates out. But every project will have its own unique needs, and that's why it's really important to get on a call with somebody, tell them all your ideas, and they'll be able to come back and say, hey, you know what, this is that, if we can cut this scope, have you heard of this application? Maybe we can integrate with it, or let's do this, let's try this strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And what we do really is we take the approach of we're going to try to save you as much money as humanly possible. We're going to try to make it so we can give you the best app at the lowest cost possible. Now, why do we do that? Because the way we make money is not like, hey, let's build this app in a way that takes twice as long so that we make twice as much money. Like, it doesn't make any sense for us to do that, because an app is never fully finished anyway. Like, you can always add more onto it. Now, it might get to a point where you say, hey, for us, this is good. Like, this is finished. And I'd say, great, perfect. And then in 5 years or so, you might come back and you might say, hey, we want to update it to the newest technology, or we want to add to it. But really, what we have found, especially since we try to be long-term partners with the businesses that we build apps for, in order to do that, we actually need to deliver you as much value as we can, because we need otherwise the project's not going to actually be successful long-term. If you go into a project to try to build an app and you don't have some good people, developers, business analysts, product owners, if you don't have some people that are doing high quality work and someone thinking about, okay, how does this get designed? How does it get built efficiently? How does it get future proofed? Like, the project just won't be successful. It's going to fail, and it's going to end up getting canceled. So, I mean, what we want to be a long-term partner. We want to make sure that these clients are working with us for years to come. So it's in our best interest to actually find the most efficient solutions so that project can actually be successful long-term. And that's what helps us, and that's what helps you.
Yeah. And people, as a business owner, if somebody's pulling their weight, right? You can look at your employees and all right, this John, he's an A-team player. He's totally worth it. He makes me $10 million a year. But Sally, she's on the verge of getting fired, right? You know that. And we know what it takes to deliver value. And so at the end of the day, we know that if we can deliver value today, we'll be able to deliver tomorrow, and we'll be able to work with you for a really long time. And that's the way that we can maximize our profits here at Ksense. It's not about trying to take as much time as possible, because then our clients will know, hey, this is taking a really long time. I don't think this should take as long as it's taking. They'll know, just like they know when their employees aren't pulling their weight, they'll know that we're not pulling our weight.
Exactly. Which is why we put a lot of resources into actually designing new ways to do things that are more efficient, better, faster, that, we can spin up authentication now in how long? Like, how many hours did that take before?
Like, it took a long time to do it before, and now we can do it really fast, which is a really good selling point for using an agency that specializes in web applications. Is we have a lot of this stuff kind of already built into Lego bricks, and we can just, some of certain things we can kind of just take and stack from different projects that we worked on.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so I know that, even the way I asked that question is a little bit misleading, because really, when you buy an app, you're not just going and buying it. It's not a transactional thing where you give someone the money and now you have the app. It really is a lot more, like you were saying, comparing it to an employee who's pulling their weight or not pulling their weight. It's a process, and you're not giving all that money up front. You're sort of paying as you go, right? So how should people really think about budgeting? I know you can get sticker shock thinking about this big $100,000 price tag, but how should they really think about that price when it comes to budgeting for the project?
Well, the way you should think about it really is in terms of a monthly development budget. So what you can sit down and basically do is say, okay, how much money do we have to spend on our technology? Updating our technology as a business, streamlining our processes, automating our processes, and investing in custom web applications. Like, how much do we have? Do we have $10,000 a month, $5,000 a month? And then if you know that is going to return an ROI in the future, and maybe to figure that out, you have to sit down with a business analyst like me, or you have to talk to somebody about your particular use case and kind of do the math on that. But once you know that those tools are going to deliver value to you, then you can budget for that every month, because done, like saying that an app is done, is really relative to you. Like, is it done providing value, or can you enhance it? has it reached its maximum potential for your company to where there's nothing else that we can automate? If so, your company is maybe fully automated at that point.
Yeah,
So
think about every software tool you've ever used. Which of the big software tools have not had an update in the last year? Like we're recording this on Zoom, the last update was probably a week ago. Why did the updates continue coming out? Well, the reason why is because software can always be better. There is no finish line. It's not like buying a tractor or buying an office. It's like hiring an employee, is really what it's like.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know that that's something that a lot of people sort of have misconceptions around. What are some other common misconceptions when it comes to the cost of web application development? What are the things that surprise people sometimes?
I think that one thing that surprises people is the difficulty of certain development tasks. I think that a lot of times clients are surprised that certain things take longer than others because it's really not always intuitive. It's like you guys built out our whole authentication system in 10 hours, but this little tiny integration took you 50, and it seems in their head that the integration was actually smaller. But then the thing that's hard to express is the reasoning for that. Like, why did that happen? Was it because we had a Lego brick for the authentication piece already and we could just put it in and wire it up? Or was it because technology has better documentation? So I think that it's really hard for our clients to get an idea of what is quick and easy and what is difficult. And that's why it's really important to have a business analyst on the team, because they're able to really help set expectations and explain this to our clients and say, hey, the reason this is going to take so long is because maybe there's no documentation for it. This tool that you're trying to integrate with, no documentation. We have to get on calls with their developers every time we need something. Yeah, of course it's going to take longer. But the business analyst will be able to explain that to you in layman's terms. Like I'm already talking about documentation, and maybe you don't even know what that is. But the business analyst will be able to explain to you, as somebody who's not a tech expert, why, what's going on here.
yeah, exactly. Related to that, I think it's actually pretty surprising to me and to a lot of clients how much depth there is to the process of designing a feature. Because it's, if you think to yourself, okay, I want to build a CRM, a basic CRM, and I want it to have email notifications, connect to my calendar, and store my customers' data. It sounds really straightforward, but then what you don't realize is, if you try to imagine that app right now, can you imagine every detail of that app? Can you imagine exactly how it's going to work in every situation? What about if people use different email providers, right? What do they need to use, Google and Outlook, or is it just going to be Google? Are they going to be sending the emails from the CRM, but it needs to connect to their Gmail account too? Or is the CRM going to have its own email account? Does it need to do a two-way sync from Google Calendar? Meaning if you change something in Google Calendar, does it need to then update in the app as well? So as soon as you start digging into something that seems simple, you start to figure out that in reality, there are endless different edge cases and different scenarios that every single one of them is a decision that has to be made, right? A trade-off. A two-way sync is a lot harder to build, but if you don't have a two-way sync, then if you change something in Google Calendar, then now you're going to have different data in Google Calendar than you are in your CRM. So there's all these little decisions, there's all these little aspects to design, and also, not just the features, but the visual elements. How does the app work? Does it have a sidebar that opens like a drawer, or does it have a pop-up, or is it a full page, or how is the form designed? What happens if someone forgets to put a required field in? Does it alert them with a red outline around the field, letting them know exactly which ones they missed? Or is it a little more confusing where, maybe somebody forgot to think of that? So there's so many different aspects to designing a feature. And I think it really surprises people because in their mind, they imagine the feature and they think they know what it's going to be like, but really they're only imagining 20% of the feature. The other 80% is just, they're not thinking about it. Like it's just outside of their visual field. Yeah.
And a lot of times we don't even know what all the questions to ask until we start going into the documentation. We start digging into the API documentation, which is basically it's the information that the service provider gives us to do the integration, and it has all these options, and we're like, oh, look, we didn't even think about this option, and we have to go back to the client and ask them. A couple other misconceptions that I think people have is assuming that all labor costs the same. Like they probably see junior developers that get paid $100,000 a year, or an offshore developer getting paid even less maybe, and they assume that all development talent is equal, and it really isn't. The truth of the matter is the better talent is always worth it, is really the truth of the matter. And if you can find a team with really good talent, you'll be able to build an app way faster and way cheaper, even though the hourly cost is more expensive. And then the other misconception that I thought of is not assuming that the application is going to have issues in the future. Like Callan's example, assume we build that integration out with Google Calendar or some other calendar provider. It's very likely that in a year or two, Google changes the way that they work. And guess what? One day, your application, somebody's going to go in and change it to the new way that Google does it. And people don't think about that. They just think of the initial development cost. They don't think of the ongoing cost of, all the other platforms changing, or the cost of scaling or infrastructure changes. If you're going to run a Super Bowl ad, we need to probably know about it so we can build it out in a way that it's going to be able to handle that weight. Otherwise, it's going to crash, right? And so these are things that people don't often think about.
It's like, have you ever been driving down the freeway and you see construction, like a lane is closed for construction, and you're like, are you serious? Like, my whole life, this road's been under construction. Like, literally 10 years ago, this same road is under construction. How does that work? How does it take them that long? And it's like, that's what all engineering is, like it's just engineering. It's infrastructure. Like things just constantly need to be kept up and repaired and changed and updated. And it's just kind of the nature of human infrastructure, with either physical infrastructure or web infrastructure.
Yeah, now that said, I don't want people to get the idea that they're going to build their app and they're going to have to pay massive fees for the rest of their life. It's really a lot like it's just like the physical infrastructure we have around us. If it's built really well the first time, it can stand up by itself for a really long time. Look at the pyramids, right? So that's why it's really important to pick the right team and take your time, do your due diligence, and make sure it's built out well.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Never a good idea to go with the lowest bidder for any kind of work at all. So let's talk about the pros and cons of a fixed price project. Obviously, from this discussion, we can tell that you need to keep a bit of an open mind as to, how a price might fluctuate based on the complexity and the challenges you might run into, maybe a change of direction. What are the pros and cons of getting a fixed price for a project?
The pro is you know how much it's going to cost up front. The con is you don't know how much it's going to cost anyway, because what's going to happen is this. So you get a fixed price, right? You do a fixed price and they say, yeah, $50,000. You get halfway through development or a little more than halfway through development. The developer comes back to you and says, hey, we're going to have to talk about an additional budget. Like we're going to have to talk about some additional funding for this project because we ran out. So like really all a fixed price is paying in installments rather than paying on an ongoing basis. You should think about it that way.
That you have to go to the negotiation board more frequently.
Right.
Why is that? Why do they run out of budget halfway through?
Well, because in order to get that sale, in order to convince you as a business owner to invest, they had to give you an unrealistic price. That's the bottom line. Like, if they tell you it's going to be $500,000, right? So the only way to give a price that won't run out is to make your best guess. Let's say your best guess. Okay, my best guess is that this is going to be $100,000 app. But what you're not realizing is that you have not taken into account the full scope, because there's no way that when someone gave you a scope document, that scope had every single feature that they're ever going to ask for in there. It's just not possible, because features grow off of each other. You build a new feature, that one new feature creates the opportunity for 10 new features up on top of it. So even if you could perfectly predict exactly how long everything's going to take, the problem is number one, not everything's in that document. I guarantee it. Number two, the things that are in that document are not described in exactly the way that they need to be built, because they're going to change. It's just the nature of web development. Those things are going to change as people use the app and as they realize what they actually want, because no one is able to predict the future, and no one's able to predict how users are going to, if their needs are going to evolve, right? So
Not to mention, even if all the requirements are in the document, as soon as that documentation gets to the developer, they are likely to interpret it differently than you did when you read it. Like if it says, and it will note, if it says something like, when there's an error occurs, it will notify this person. Well, the developer might say, okay, I'm going to show like a little notification bubble on the web page. When you were reading it, you may have thought that needed to send you an email. And then you go back and you say, listen, it's not going to work just to have the notification bubble. And then the developer's going to, you know what they're going to say? Well, we need additional budget in order to integrate, because we need an email client. We need to build that into it. Then we need to build the email templates out. Do you want to have control over what these email templates say? What if there's a bunch of errors that all happen at the same time? Do you want 50 emails or just one email? And you can see how it like gets complex really fast. Now we're completely outside of the original document.
Mm-hmm. One tiny misinterpretation of one line in that document equals hundreds of hours potentially. And that's really not an exaggeration. Like the thing is, that's why moving in small iterations is key, because it's like the scope can explode on you, really. And it really, even if everyone involved does their best to try to prevent it, like, what are you going to do in that situation? Just say, okay, I guess we're not going to have emails. What if your business needs emails? You have to have them. So now, there's no way to avoid that scope increase. It's going to happen. So with the fixed price, when the developer has done this a few times, so maybe a developer, when they're first starting out, or an agency or whatever, like, if they're first starting out and they do a fixed price and they really get burned, because they give someone a fixed price and they write a contract and it's all written out and everything, and they ended up having to do a bunch of free work. Now, that's only going to happen one time to that agency or that developer or that freelancer, until they realize, okay, from now on, like, I'm going to leave myself an out to not have that happen again. I can't work for free when the scope increases every time. So what they're going to do is either they're going to give you a dramatically larger budget. And even if they do that, by the way, that does not mean that they won't eventually run out of that. So they're going to give you a larger budget than maybe, like, they're going to double or triple their estimate in order to try to account for it. Or they're going to give you a smaller one, but then they're going to come back to you once you already put $50,000 into your app and you can't back out now. And they're going to say, oh, by the way, we need more money for this. And what are you going to say? You've already put $50,000 into the app. It's a massive amount of sunk cost. So, you really want to avoid those type of traps, because, we've seen this happen a few times, and it's really difficult for both people involved, for the agency and for the business, because it's like the expectations just weren't set properly up front. And so no one wins. So, yeah, that's why it's really important.
Yeah, the only time when somebody wins in a fixed price is when when the agency does value-based pricing. They know that this is going to save the company $10 million a year. So they charge $1 million for something that, cost them $100,000 to build. Or that's case one, and the agency wins in that case. But you as a business owner, you only win when the developers lose, right? When you're able to say, all right, we have a $100,000 budget, and anything I can think of, for as long as I can think of, you're going to do work for free, even after that $100,000 is gone. And that's when you win. And that's why it really is, fixed pricing's a zero-sum game. For one person to win, the other person has to lose, and that's why we don't subscribe to that philosophy of development.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And so it sounds really scary to just think of a project in an open scope, and when you say, well, development's never over. So you're right. It's a bit of a trap. It's a little bit of a bait and switch to do a fixed price. The only way that price ends up not changing is if you got ripped off, right? So how do you make it not be scary? How do you help people have clear expectations when it comes to sort of that ongoing process of figuring out what you need to work on next and about how long it's going to take?
Well, the first thing to do is to set realistic expectations up front. Now, even though we don't know how long something's going to take and we can't give a fixed price, we can still tell you, what type of scale we're looking at, and we're going to be upfront with you and say, yeah, to build an app like this, you're looking at minimum $100,000, right, to build that type of app, and that way, okay, this is what I'm getting into.
Like, we don't know all the features that are going to come down the road, but if we know these are the 5 main features that we're going to worry about, usually we can give a floor and a ceiling of what the cost is starting the project. Now, we're not going to promise that we're going to be able to stay, under that ceiling, because the project's going to change. It always does.
Right. So it's
Yeah,
it's about setting an expectation, right?
uh-huh. Yeah, because the scary part is the unknown. So you really got to focus on, well, here's what we do know, right? Maybe we'll continue working with you on this app for years. We don't know. But what we do know is you want these features. And we know that here's where we need to start. And that's going to take us about, 40 to 60 hours to get this part done that's going to provide value to you immediately. And, those bite-sized pieces of, taking a couple of steps into the dark, you can see a little bit in front of you. That's a lot less scary, I imagine, for these clients where they know they're getting some value back in a relatively short amount of time. Is that right?
Yeah, if you think about this, and this is good news, is we know everything we need to know if it's the right decision for your business. So here's what we know. We know, like, as a business, what your budget is per month for development, right? You can figure that out. You also can figure out what the ROI is going to be on that software by calculating, okay, what is this going to do for our business? What tangible results are we going to get when this software is finished, right? So then all you have to do is say, okay, we know how much we have to spend, and we know that this is going to give us X amount of tangible results. So now what we need to know is, how do we build this in the most efficient way possible? And how do we build it in the best way possible and maximize our value that we're going to get out of it, right? And that's where choosing an agency is really important. Choosing somebody that you are confident knows what they're doing and knows how to build this type of app. So that way you can say, okay, we're thinking about this in a monthly way, like we're thinking about this, or quarterly, or however you want to think about it. But like, think about marketing, for example. Like, if you're going to have a marketing team, it's very similar to web development in that you're going to spend X amount per month, and it's going to take a long time. If you're doing like SEO, or you're doing like content marketing, it's going to take a long time before you start seeing results. But you know that those results are going to come, and your business has this amount per month, like whatever it may be, to spend on that. So you can intuit that it's worth the money and it's worth the effort, right? So it's the same with web development. Like, you can look at your budget, look at what you're building, and kind of intuit, like, okay, this is the right path for us. We're going to achieve these outcomes, and we're going to do it in the most efficient way possible.
Have you guys found that, across industries, prices tend to vary? Like, if you're working with a manufacturing company versus working with a food and beverage company, do you kind of already know how the complexity or the pricing is going to change?
Yeah, usually. I could tell somebody if they're working in the healthcare space, generally it's going to be more expensive just because there's additional requirements that need to be built into the web applications, usually for compliance reasons. It's also in healthcare, it seems to be a lot harder to work with other people. Like, uh, just from my anecdotal experience, everybody books meetings 1 week, 2 weeks out, which means that if I have a question about where the app is, I need to wait additional time. And if I'm working with any third parties, a lot of times it's hard to get stakeholder buy-in on the projects. Another thing that has like another big factor I would say is how many people have their hands in the cookie jar? How many different stakeholders are we working with? Are they all aligned on the vision of the project? Because if they're not, then it's going to be a big hassle for somebody like Calvin to kind of satisfy everybody, right? And try to build the app out in a way that everybody's going to be happy with. And so that ends up requiring more planning and more meetings with stakeholders. We find that the best result is when there's one person and they're in charge of commanding the ship and talking directly to the business analysts on our team. And they handle all of the internal conflicts themselves. They don't bring us into it. And we have recurring meetings once a week with them where we go over the status of the project and where it's headed and where they want it. That's usually where we see the most success. But yeah, anecdotally, if you're in healthcare, I would expect things to be a little bit more expensive.
Yeah. Certain industries have very technical or complex requirements. Like if you think about a marketing company, they're fairly simple. Like they probably need like a CRM, or they might need like some email automation or something like that. If you're looking at aerospace or some tech companies or certain manufacturing companies that have very complex logistics systems, like it's probably going to cost more because we're going to need the very best people on our team to wrap their heads around that problem and figure out, like, we had a client a few months ago who needed a very complex inventory management system with real-time SKU that updates in real time based on a bunch of changes. So then we had to sit down and figure that out, like solve that problem. It's a very complex like database structure that we had to come up with. So the higher level, more complex features are going to be more expensive, generally speaking. And usually you can get a good idea, like your business. So if your business is one of those highly complex businesses, then it might be more difficult, especially for if you're looking at like offshore agencies or whatever. They really, a lot of times they can't handle that kind of stuff. That's why we have a process for business analysis, so that we can wrap our heads around those types of issues.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
usually
definitely.
you'll know yourself, like as a business owner, does everything cost more in your industry? Because if it does, then software is no different.
Yeah, I mean, like with your example of medical apps, there's more that goes into security and privacy. There's more that goes into a lot of that stuff, how robust the system is and making sure that maybe there's some redundancy so that people's data is there when they need it, and you're not going to lose really important data that's critical to somebody's health. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.